The wind howled across the San Juan Valley like a pack of hungry coyotes, slamming against the tin walls of the feed shed, with enough force to make old Jeremiah Tucker's bones ache. Then the sky split open, not with a whimper, but with a roar that sent lightning dancing along the ridgeline like drunken cowboys at a saloon. Thunder shook the ground beneath Jake Carter's boots, rattling the barbed wire he'd been meaning to fix before the storm hit. Too late now. Rain came down in buckets, soaking his denim shirt to the skin. Out by the north fence, his cattle bunched together, their eyes wild with fear. Jake muttered a low curse, more for his own nerves than theirs. Storms he could handle. What came next, that was trouble. The hoofbeats cut through the storm like a knife. Not the skittish patter of a spooked Mustang, but the steady, deliberate thud of a rider pushing hard. Jake lifted his lantern, its glow slicing through the downpour, just in time to catch a bay mare rounding the bend. The horse was lathered up its sides, heaving, and the rider, a woman small and wiry, clung to its mane like her life depended on it. Her dress was soaked through, plastered to her frame, and when the mare slipped in the mud, Jake was already moving. He grabbed the reins just as the horse lurched, steadying it with a firm hand. The woman looked up, rainwater streaking her face, and fixed him with eyes as sharp as broken bottle glass. "I ain't here for tea and sympathy, cowboy." She spat, voice shaking, but clear as a gunshot. "I'm here 'cause someone's aiming to make sure I don't see sunrise." For a heartbeat, the absurdity of it hung between them, like something out of one of those dime novels folks read back east. Then Jake swung her down from the saddle, surprised at how little she weighed, all sinew and grit. Her boots sank into the mud, and for the first time he noticed the leather satchel tied to her wrist, as if she expected the whole world to try and steal it. Inside the ranch house was a sanctuary warmth from the fireplace, the scent of mesquite and old wood. She stood there, dripping, shoulders hunched like a cornered animal. "Sit," Jake grunted, tossing her a wool blanket from the cedar chest. She caught it but didn't move, her fingers tightening around the satchel. "You planning to stand there all night?" he added, nodding to the chair by the fire. That got a reaction, a flicker of something, defiance maybe, or just plain stubbornness. "Depends," she shot back. "You the type to ask questions first, or shoot?" Jake barked a laugh, the sound rough as sandpaper. "Lady, if I wanted you dead, I'd have let that mare throw you into the creek." She hesitated, then finally sank into the chair, though her grip on the satchel never loosened. Outside, the storm raged on, but in that moment Jake had the uneasy feeling the real trouble had just ridden into his life, and it wasn't leaving anytime soon. Then, as if to prove him right, the distant crack of a rifle shot split the night. The woman's head snapped up, her eyes locking onto his. "Told you," she said, voice dry as dust. "Ain't here for the weather." She didn't thank him, just wrapped the blanket tighter, her fingers twitching toward the knife strapped to her thigh, a detail Jake hadn't missed. "Name's Carter," he offered, nudging the kettle over the fire. "Jake Carter. Lena Reyes," she said after a beat, her voice rough as a rusted hinge. "From Laredo." That explained the accent, but nothing else. Before he could press, 3 sharp knocks rattled the door. Jake's hand went to the Winchester leaning against the wall. "Easy there, partner," came a gravelly voice from outside. Jake lowered the rifle and yanked the door open to reveal Sheriff Eli Dawson, his duster slick with rain eyes sharp as a hawk's. The lawman's gaze skipped past Jake and locked onto Lena, lingering a second too long. "Storm's got the whole county jumpy," Eli said, stepping inside without waiting for an invite. "Word is the Delgado boys are back. Rode through Silver Creek last night asking about a woman." His stare settled on Lena again. "You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" Lena's fingers tightened around her mug. "I don't know any Delgados," she said, too calm. Eli smirked, thumbing the brim of his hat. "Funny, they seem to know you." The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Jake crossed his arms, stepping slightly between them. "She's just passing through Eli. Storm caught her on the road." The sheriff chewed on that, then shrugged. "Well, if she's smart, she'll keep moving. Delgados don't take kindly to loose ends." He tipped his hat and turned to leave, pausing at the door. "Oh, and Jake, you might want to check your south pasture come morning. Found a dead steer out there, bullet between the eyes. Real professional-like." The door slammed shut behind him, leaving silence thick enough to choke on. Lena's mug hit the table with a clatter. "I should go." "Like hell," Jake growled. "You go out there now, you're dead before sunrise." She whirled on him, eyes blazing. You don't know what you're mixed up in, cowboy. Then enlighten me. For a long moment, she just stared, then exhaled hard. That satchel, it's got proof the Delgados robbed the El Paso Railroad. Ledger's name's enough to hang every last one of them. She swallowed. Problem is, their brother was the engineer. He didn't make it off that train. Jake's gut twisted. Revenge was one thing. A massacre was another. Outside, the wind howled like a dying animal, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote yipped, or maybe it was a signal. Lena's hand drifted to her knife again. They'll burn this place down to get to me. Jake grabbed his coat off the hook. Then we'd better not be here when they do. He tossed her his spare Colt. You any good with that? A slow, grim smile curled her lips. I'm better. The storm had eased, but the night was far from over. As they saddled up, Jake caught movement near the tree-lined shadows shifting where they shouldn't. Too late to run. Too late to hide. Lena cocked the hammer. Guess morning came early. Jake spat into the dirt. Welcome to Texas. The morning sun bled gold across the San Juan Valley, turning the wet earth to shimmering mist. Jake leaned against the porch, steaming coffee in hand, but his eyes weren't on the sunrise. They were locked on the fresh tracks cutting through the mud near the creek. 3 riders, headed toward town at a leisurely pace like they owned the damn territory. Inside, the scent of frying bacon and strong coffee should have been comforting. Lena stood at the stove, her borrowed shirt hanging off one shoulder, flipping tortillas with more confidence than she'd shown last night. Didn't take you for the domestic type, Jake said, sliding into his chair. She didn't look up. There's a lot you don't know about me, Carter. The tortilla hissed as she flipped it. Like why 3 men would rather die than let you reach town. Lena's hands stilled for just a second. Then she set the plate down with deliberate calm. Because I stole something worth killing for. Before Jake could respond, the door banged open. Maggie Callahan stormed in like a dust devil, her leather satchel thumping onto the table. Brought you supplies, she announced, then froze when she saw Lena. Her sharp green eyes flicked from Lena's damp hair to Jake's rumpled shirt. Well, ain't this cozy? Morning, Maggie, Jake said too casually. Maggie wasn't buying it. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Word in town is Sam Delgado's offering 50 grand for the return of some stolen property. Her gaze locked onto Lena. Funny thing, description matches you right down to those green eyes. The room went still. Lena's fingers twitched toward the knife at her belt. Jake sighed and pushed back from the table. Maggie, meet Lena. Lena, meet the biggest gossip in 3 counties. Maggie smirked. And the only one who knows where to find Doc Holliday's old hideout. She tossed a crumpled wanted poster on the table, Lena's face staring back cold and defiant. They're combing every ranch between here and the border. You got till noon before they burn this place to the ground looking for her. Lena snatched up the poster, her jaw tight. Then I'll ride out now. Like hell, Jake growled. You go alone, you're signing your death warrant. Maggie pulled a Colt from her satchel and spun it on her finger. Lucky for you, I know a shortcut through Devil's Canyon. Get you to the railroad by sundown. She paused, eyeing Jake. Assuming you're fool enough to go with her, Jake grabbed his hat off the hook. When have I ever been smart? Outside, the morning was too quiet. No birds, no wind. Just the creeping sense of eyes watching from the tree line. As they saddled the horses, Maggie leaned in close. One more thing, Delgado's got a new hired gun. Some fancy pistolero from Mexico City. She nodded toward the distant ridge. And if I spotted your tracks this morning, you can bet he did too. Lena tightened her saddlebag, her voice low. How long do we have? The distant crack of a rifle split the air, kicking up dirt 10 feet from the porch. Maggie didn't flinch. Looks like you're out of time. The morning sun burned off the last of the storm's chill, but a different kind of tension settled over the ranch. Lena stood frozen as Maggie's words hung in the air, her fingers instinctively checking the revolver at her hip. 50 grand. Lena's laugh was sharp as broken glass. Sam Delgado always did overvalue his possessions. Maggie's eyes narrowed. This ain't about money anymore, darling. That pistolero, they call him La Sombra, killed 7 men in Sonora last month, left each one with a silver peso in their mouth. She tossed something onto the table, a tarnished coin with a single bullet hole through it. Found this nailed to your wanted poster outside the saloon. Jake picked up the coin, his thumb rubbing over the rough edges. Message received. He met Lena's gaze. You didn't mention this was personal. Lena's hand trembled slightly as she poured coffee. Everything's personal in Mexico. A sudden commotion outside, hooves pounding, then silence. Jake was at the window in 2 strides. Rider coming hard from the south. He grabbed his Winchester. Maggie, take the back trail. If this goes bad, already gone. Maggie vanished out the kitchen door like smoke. The pounding on the door came like gunfire. Carter, open up. Jake recognized the voice, Thomas, the young ranch hand from the Double R. He yanked the door open to find the kid swaying in the saddle blood, soaking through his shirt. They hit the line shack. Killed Miguel, Thomas gasped. Said to tell you, the shadow comes at noon. Then he slid from his horse unconscious. Lena was already moving tearing cloth for bandages. We need to... A single gunshot echoed across the valley, distant but unmistakable. Then another. Closer. Jake checked the cylinder of his Colt. That's no warning shot. That's a countdown. He tossed Lena a saddlebag. Grab what you need. We ride in 60 seconds. As they burst from the house, the morning sun glinted off something metallic near the corral. Jake stooped to pick it up, a silver cufflink engraved with intricate scrolling and a single letter D. Lena went pale. Delgado's men wear those. They're here. From the ridge above the ranch, a slow rhythmic clapping echoed. A figure stood silhouetted against the sky, his Mexican charro suit black as a hangman's rope. When he spoke, his voice carried like cold wind through canyon walls. Senorita Reyes, you've led me on quite the chase. Jake's finger hovered near the trigger. That him. Lena's jaw tightened. Worse, that's Delgado's brother. The man spread his arms wide. Behind him, 6 riders crested the ridge, their rifles glinting in the sun. Time's up, Lena whispered. Jake spat in the dirt and cocked his revolver. Then let's not keep them waiting. The morning sun cut sharp angles across the ranch yard as Jake watched Lena move through her chores with a quiet determination that surprised him. Her hands, once soft as banker's gloves, now bore fresh calluses from hauling feed sacks and mending fence lines. She worked with the same intensity she'd shown when holding a gun, all focus, no wasted motion. At the corral, the young chestnut mare danced sideways, her eyes rolling white at the unfamiliar hands trying to bridle her. Lena didn't flinch when the mare nearly crushed her boot. Easy now, she murmured, her voice low and steady like runoff through a canyon. On the 3rd try, the bit slid home. Damn if you ain't a natural, Jake said, leaning against the fence post. Lena wiped sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. Had plenty of practice being patient with stubborn creatures. Her eyes flicked to Jake just long enough to make him grin. The moment shattered when Tomas came riding in at a dead run, his horse lathered. Jake riders coming up from the south, draw 5, maybe 6 of them. His voice cracked. They're wearing Delgado's colors. Jake's coffee cup hit the dirt. The cufflink in his pocket suddenly weighed like a cannonball. Lena didn't hesitate. She snatched the Winchester leaning against the water trough and tossed it to Jake. Told you they'd come at noon. Thought we had more time. Jake checked the rifle's load. Tomas, get to the bunkhouse. Wake the boys, and a single gunshot echoed across the valley, then silence. Too soon. They weren't supposed to fire until... The chestnut mare screamed and reared as a bullet kicked up dirt near her hooves. From the ridge above the ranch, a voice called down in heavily accented English. Senor Carter, we come for what belongs to Delgado. Jake's fingers tightened around the Winchester. Like hell you do. Lena pressed close, her breath warm against his ear. They'll burn this place to the ground looking for me. Her hand closed around his wrist. There's a canyon behind the north pasture. I know every inch of this land, Jake growled. We're not running. Another shot rang out closer this time. The kitchen window shattered. Jake spun toward the bunkhouse where Tomas lay sprawled in the dirt, clutching his shoulder. Behind him, the first of Delgado's riders crested the ridge, their rifles glinting in the midday sun. Lena's fingers found Jake's. Then we make our stand here. The chestnut mare bolted as the next volley of gunfire tore through the ranch yard. Jake dropped to one knee, Winchester steady against his shoulder. Somewhere in the chaos, he heard Lena's cool voice beside him. Remember, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. The first rider fell before his horse crossed the property line. The morning sun burned hot across the north pasture as Jake drove the post-hole digger into the unyielding earth. Each thrust sent vibrations up his arms, the Texas dirt fighting back like it always did this time of year. Lena worked beside him without complaint, her hands already raw from yesterday's labor, but still steady as she tamped down another post. Wires cut clean here, she called, holding up a severed end. Not storm damage, done with bolt cutters. Jake spat into the dust. Delgado's boys don't waste time on subtlety. A shadow crossed Lena's face as she stared at the distant ridge. They're testing your defenses, seeing how far they can push before... The crack of a rifle shot split the air. Dirt exploded 6 inches from Jake's boot. He reacted on instinct, tackling Lena behind the wagon as a second shot pinged off the metal wheel rim. "Stay down!" His fingers found the Winchester they'd stashed under the seat. Lena's breath came fast against his neck. "Two shooters, ridge at 10 o'clock, and..." Another shot. This one came from the opposite direction, splintering the wagon's sideboard. "Damn it," Jake racked the rifle's lever. "They've got us pinched." Lena's fingers dug into his arm. "Give me your pistol." "You can't, Lasurum." "I counted 3 shots." Her eyes burned with cold fury. "Mexican carbines hold 5. They're reloading." Before Jake could stop her, Lena rolled from cover and sprinted toward the boulder line. A 4th shot kicked up dust at her heels, but she didn't falter. When she reached cover, she turned and gave Jake a sharp hand signal, military precise, not the gesture of some railroad thief. The realization hit Jake like a gut punch. She'd been trained, properly trained. Another shot rang out, this one coming from Lena's position. A scream echoed across the pasture as one of the ambushers tumbled from the ridge. Jake didn't waste the opportunity. He broke left, flanking the remaining shooter. By the time he crested the rise, all he found was a hastily abandoned position and a single silver cufflink glinting in the dirt, its engraved D staring up at him like an accusation. Lena joined him moments later, her borrowed shirt streaked with dirt and sweat. "They'll send more next time." Jake pocketed the cufflink, his mind racing. "That hand signal you used." 10th Cavalry. For the first time since they'd met, Lena looked genuinely surprised. Then her expression shuttered closed. "You know your military drills, cowboy." The distant drum of hoofbeats saved Jake from responding. They watched as a dust cloud rose along the southern trail. Not the 2 or 3 riders they'd expected, but a dozen at least, moving fast. Lena checked the pistol cylinder. "We can't hold them here." Jake's gaze swept the terrain, landing on the narrow canyon cutting through the north ridge, the same one Maggie had mentioned. "Then we don't." He grabbed Lena's arm. "Saddle up. We're taking this fight to Devil's Canyon." As they raced for the horses, the first of Delgado's advance riders crested the hill behind them, their war cries carrying on the hot wind. Lena swung into the saddle with practiced ease, her eyes locked on the approaching dust cloud. "You sure about this, Carter?" Jake spurred his mount forward. "Only thing I'm sure of, today's going to be one hell of a story." The afternoon sun beat down like a blacksmith's hammer as Jake tightened the last strand of barbed wire along the north ridge. His hands burned with fresh blisters, but the pain barely registered, not with that nagging itch between his shoulder blades, the one that said they were being watched. Lena wiped sweat from her brow with a torn sleeve, her fingers trembling slightly as she tied off the final knot. "Wires tight enough to play a tune on," she muttered. Jake nodded toward the distant dust plume on the southern trail. "Hope you know nearer my God to thee, because we're about to have company." A shadow crossed Lena's face as she followed his gaze. The riders were still miles off, but closing fast. 12, maybe 15 of them, too many for a cattle inspection, not enough for a full-scale raid. Testing the waters. Ernesto rode up just then, his bay gelding lathered from hard riding. He tossed Jake a fresh coil of wire without dismounting. "Delgado's got scouts at Miller's Crossing." He said low enough that Lena wouldn't hear. "They're asking about a woman matching her description, offering gold." Jake's jaw tightened. "How much? Enough to make honest men consider sinning?" Ernesto's eyes flicked to Lena, who was pretending not to listen while she checked the fence stretcher. "They say she stole more than money from Delgado. Say she took something personal." Before Jake could respond, a gunshot echoed across the valley. The horses startled as a bullet kicked up dirt 20 yards short of their position, a warning shot. Lena was moving before the echo faded, snatching the Winchester from the wagon. "That's no scout party," she said, chambering around. "That's an advance team." Jake grabbed his binoculars. Through the heat shimmer, he counted 6 riders fanning out along the ridge. Behind them, the main group had halted just outside rifle range. A lone figure sat apart from the others, his black charro suit stark against the pale dirt. Even at this distance, the silver conchos on his jacket caught the light like signal mirrors. "Delgado himself," Jake breathed. Lena's hands went still on the rifle. "No, that's his brother Alejandro. Worse temper, worse aim." She swallowed hard. "If he's here, this isn't a reconnaissance anymore. It's a declaration." Ernesto crossed himself. "Dios mío." Another shot rang out closer this time. The bullet whined off a rock near Jake's boot. Lena's voice turned deadly calm. We need to fall back to the ranch. Now! Jake shook his head. They'll cut us off before we reach the yard. His eyes darted to the narrow arroyo cutting through the western ridge, the back way to Devil's Canyon. There's another option. Lena followed his gaze and went pale. That's suicide. Suicide staying here. Jake grabbed the reins of the nearest horse. Ernesto, ride for the double R. Tell Calhoun we need every man who can hold a rifle. As Ernesto galloped away, Jake turned to Lena. Her shirt was soaked through with sweat, her knuckles white around the Winchester stock. For the first time since she'd stumbled into his life, she looked genuinely afraid. You don't have to do this, he said quietly. Lena's jaw set. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a tarnished silver star, the kind Texas Rangers wore. Yeah, she said, pinning it to her shirt. I do. The revelation hit Jake like a kick from a mule. All this time, he didn't have a chance to process it before more gunfire erupted from the ridge. Closer now, deliberate. Lena swung into the saddle, her Ranger's star catching the sun. You coming, cowboy, or do I get all the fun? Jake spurred his horse after her as bullets chewed up the dirt behind them. The canyon loomed ahead, its narrow walls promising either salvation or a grave. Either way, by sundown, the score between Delgado and whatever Lena really was would be settled in blood and gun smoke. The morning sun cast long shadows as Jake guided the wagon towards San Juan town, the reins loose in his calloused hands. Beside him, Lena sat rigid in the borrowed calico dress, her fingers tracing the outline of the hidden derringer strapped to her thigh. The Ranger star was tucked away now, better to keep that card close for now. Market day after a storm, Jake said, keeping his voice casual as they rolled past a stand of mesquite. Whole damn county shows up. Could work to our advantage. Lena's eyes never stopped moving, scanning every rock outcrop and arroyo. Or it's a perfect hunting ground. Crowds make for easy knives in the back. Ahead, the town sprawled across the valley floor like a discarded poker hand, saloon livery mercantile, all baking under the same relentless sun. Jake spotted Ernesto leaning against the hitching post outside the blacksmith's, his hat pulled low. The old vaquero didn't wave, just gave an almost imperceptible nod toward the cantina. Jake's gut tightened. He's here. Lena's hand stilled on the derringer. How many? Ernesto says 2 with him. Probably more we don't see. Jake guided the wagon to a stop near the mercantile, his boot heels kicking up dust as he stepped down. Remember? I know the play, Lena interrupted, adjusting the sunbonnet Lucia had insisted she wear. Smile pretty, watch your exits, and don't draw unless you mean to kill. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Market rules. They moved through the crowded square with deliberate slowness, Jake buying salt and coffee beans, while Lena examined bolts of fabric with feigned interest. The tension between them was a live wire, every sense attuned to the shifting crowd. Near the butcher's stall, a child's laughter cut through the murmur of voices, too sharp, too sudden. Lena flinched. Jake caught her wrist. Easy. He won't make a move here. Too many witnesses. As if summoned by the words, a man stepped from the cantina's shadowed porch. Rafael Delgado looked nothing like his brother, where Alejandro was all sharp edges and flashy silver. Rafael wore his wealth quietly, hand-tooled boots, a tailored linen duster, and eyes as cold as a winter creek. His gaze locked onto Lena with the precision of a rifle sight. Jake felt Lena's pulse jump under his fingers. Don't run, he murmured. That's what he wants. Delgado took his time crossing the square, his 2 bodyguards hanging back near the water trough. When he spoke, his voice carried the polished accent of a Mexico City education. Señorita Reyes, what an unexpected pleasure. Lena's smile could have frosted glass. Rafael, still sending other men to do your dirty work. The insult landed like a thrown knife. Delgado's smile never wavered, but his fingers twitched toward the pearl-handled revolver at his hip. I see you found new employment. His eyes flicked to Jake. Though I question your taste in protectors, Jake shifted his weight, letting his coat fall open enough to reveal the Colt at his waist. Problem, amigo? The square had gone quiet around them, vendors pausing, mid-haggle children pulled close by watchful mothers. Delgado considered Jake with the detached interest of a man examining livestock. No problem at all, just reclaiming what's mine. He reached into his coat. Lena's derringer appeared in her hand like magic. Try it. Delgado froze, then slowly withdrew a folded paper, a wanted poster with Lena's likeness glaring back. The bounty figure made Jake's breath catch. $50,000, Delgado said pleasantly. enough to make even an honest man reconsider his loyalties. Jake spat in the dust at Delgado's boots. Your money's no good here. For the first time, Delgado's mask slipped. You'll regret those words, vaquero. He turned on his heel, the poster fluttering to the ground. As he walked away, he called over his shoulder, enjoy the market. It may be your last. The tension didn't break until Delgado's riders disappeared down the south road. Lena exhaled shakily, tucking the derringer away. That went well. Jake picked up the wanted poster, his blood running cold at the small print beneath the bounty, dead or alive. He met Lena's gaze. We need to get home, now. As they hurried back to the wagon, Jake caught sight of 3 fresh horses tied behind the livery, their coats still damp with sweat from hard riding. The brands weren't local, and the riders were nowhere in sight. Lena followed his gaze and paled. They're not leaving, they're circling. Jake snapped the reins, sending the wagon lurching forward. The road home had never seemed longer. Every shadowed arroyo, every stand of juniper could conceal an ambush. The wind carried the faintest hint of mesquite smoke, not from town, but from the direction of his ranch. Lena's hand found his, her grip like iron. Faster, she whispered. Somewhere ahead, a gunshot echoed across the valley. Then another. Jake's heart hammered against his ribs. The shots were coming from his land. The fire had burned low in the hearth, casting long shadows across the ranch house floor. Jake sat with his boots propped on the table, the worn grip of his Colt warm in his palm as he methodically cleaned each chamber. Across from him, Lena worked a whetstone along the blade of her knife, the rhythmic scrape filling the quiet between them. You should have told me about the Ranger Star sooner, Jake said without looking up. Lena tested the edge against her thumb. Would it have changed anything? Jake thought about the wanted poster burning in the stove, about Delgado's cold eyes in the marketplace. Might have brought me a better rifle. A ghost of a smile touched Lena's lips before fading. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters like an unwelcome guest testing the locks. Both of them tensed at the sound. He'll come tonight, Lena said softly. The knife caught the firelight as she turned it. Men like Delgado can't walk away from a public slight. Jake nodded toward the window where the silhouette of Ernesto's rifle barrel was just visible on the porch. Let him. We've got the high ground, and a single gunshot cracked through the night, followed by the splintering crash of the chicken coop exploding into flames. Jake was on his feet before the echo faded, snatching the Winchester from its pegs. Right on schedule, Lena muttered, kicking over the table for cover as another volley of shots peppered the front wall. Through the broken window, Jake counted 6 riders circling the yard, their torches casting hellish shadows across the dirt. Delgado wasn't among them, of course not. The bastard would wait somewhere safe until the dirty work was done. Ernesto's rifle barked from the porch, sending one rider tumbling from his saddle. The others scattered, taking cover behind the burning coop and water trough. East window, Lena suddenly shouted. Jake spun in time to see 2 shadows slinking toward the kitchen door, more of Delgado's men trying to flank them. He fired twice. The first shot went wide. The second caught a man in the shoulder, sending him staggering back into the darkness. Lena moved like Quicksilver, darting to the bedroom and returning with a bandolier of ammunition. They've got us surrounded, she said, tossing Jake a handful of cartridges. Ideas? Jake reloaded with practiced speed. Yeah, we stopped waiting. He grabbed the lantern from the table and hurled it through the window onto the porch. The kerosene ignited instantly, creating a wall of fire between the house and the attackers. In the sudden light, Jake saw the panic in the remaining riders' eyes as their advantage disappeared. Lena didn't hesitate. She was out the door before Jake could stop her, her knife finding one man's throat while her derringer barked twice at another. Jake followed his Winchester, cutting down a third rider, trying to flee toward the barn. The sudden silence was louder than the gunfire. Smoke hung thick in the air, mixing with the acrid stench of burned wood and blood. Jake's ears rang as he scanned the perimeter, his fingers still tense on the trigger. Clear, Lena called from the corral, wiping her blade on a dead man's shirt. Ernesto emerged from his sniper's nest, his face grim. More will come. Jake nodded, staring at the burning remnants of his chicken coop. The flames reflected in his eyes like the hell he knew was just beginning. Let them. Inside, the wanted poster had burned to ash in the stove, but the words remained etched in Jake's mind as clearly as the scars on his knuckles. Dead or alive. Delgado had made his choice. Come morning, Jake would make his. The last light of day bled crimson across the valley as Jake leaned against the porch post, rolling a cigarette between his fingers. Inside, Lena moved through the kitchen with quiet efficiency. The clink of dishes, the scrape of a chair, ordinary sounds that felt strangely precious now. Ernesto's warning still hung in the air between them like gun smoke. Two riders in the pass. Jake struck a match, the flare illuminating the hard set of his jaw. "They'll come tonight," he said more to himself than to Lena as she stepped onto the porch. She handed him a steaming mug of coffee, her fingers brushing his rough, now from ranch work, no longer the soft hands of a fugitive. "Let them." The simple defiance in her voice made Jake look up. The dying light caught the curve of her cheek, the stubborn set of her shoulders. She wasn't the same woman who'd stumbled into his yard weeks ago, half drowned and running. "You could still ride out," he said quietly. "Head north, lose yourself in the territories." Lena's laugh was short and sharp. "And do what spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder." She took a sip from her own mug, her eyes on the darkening ridge. "I'm done running, Jake." Something tightened in his chest at the way she said his name, like it belonged in her mouth. A coyote yipped in the distance, the sound too close to a signal. Jake's hand drifted to the Colt at his hip out of habit. "If we stay, this won't end with a few warning shots over the fence line." Lena set her cup down with deliberate calm. When she turned to him, her gaze was steady as a gun sight. "Then we make sure it ends our way." The unspoken words hung between them together. From the ridge, the faint glint of a spyglass caught the last of the sun. Jake didn't reach for his rifle. Let them see. Let them know he wasn't hiding. Lena's fingers brushed the back of his hand, a silent promise in the gathering dark. Somewhere beyond the ranch, trouble was coming. But for the first time in years, Jake Carter wasn't facing it alone. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain and something else beneath it. Gun oil, sweat, the metallic tang of anticipation. Jake exhaled slowly, his breath mingling with the steam from his coffee. "Best douse the lamps early," he said. Lena nodded, already moving toward the door. "I'll get the rifles." As night fell over the valley, the ranch house went dark, but the windows weren't the only things watching. The morning sun burned away the last traces of dawn mist as Jake guided the wagon through the narrow pass, the wooden wheels groaning against the rocky trail. Beside him, Lena sat straight-backed, her fingers resting lightly on the Winchester across her lap. She wore the same calico dress from town, but there was nothing soft about her now, only the quiet readiness of a drawn blade. Jake didn't need to point out the riders blocking the trail ahead. Lena's sharp inhale told him she'd seen them too. Three men silhouetted against the pale sky. Delgado sat center saddle, his black duster flaring like vultures' wings, the silver conchos along his jacket catching the light. His two hired guns flanked him, one with a shotgun resting across his thighs, the other with his hand already hovering near his pistol. "Road's closed." Delgado called, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "Unless we settle our business." Jake brought the wagon to a stop, his own hand drifting to the Colt at his hip. "Only business here is you getting the hell out of my way." Delgado's smile didn't reach his eyes. He tipped his hat toward Lena. "Señorita Reyes, your father sends his regards and his terms." He drew a folded paper from his coat. "Return what you stole, and he'll only take your right hand for the insult." Lena's laugh was colder than a winter creek. "Tell my father to go to hell and take you with him." The shotgun rider tensed his finger, edging toward the trigger. Jake kept his voice deceptively calm. "You pull that trigger, amigo, you better kill me with the first shot. Otherwise, I'll peel your skin off in strips." A flicker of uncertainty crossed the man's face. Delgado held up a gloved hand. "No need for violence." His gaze slid back to Lena. "Yet. But understand this, you can't hide behind this rancher forever. Every fence line ends somewhere." Jake snapped the reins, suddenly sending the wagon lurching forward. Delgado's horse shied, forcing him to wheel aside as the wagon barreled through the gap. A single gunshot rang out a warning that kicked up dirt near the rear wheel, but Jake didn't slow. "Hold on," he barked as the wagon hit a rut, nearly bouncing Lena from the seat. She clung to the Winchester, her eyes blazing as she looked back at the receding figures. "They'll follow," she said. Jake nodded grimly, pushing the team harder. "Let them. I know this land better than they know their own mothers." The trail dipped into a dry wash, then forked, one path leading to town, the other cutting through a maze of arroyos only a local could navigate. Jake took the second, the wagon rattling over stones as the pass narrowed. Lena braced herself against the dash. "Where are we?" "Shortcut," Jake interrupted. He jerked his chin toward a stand of juniper ahead. "When we reach those trees, grab the rifle and jump clear." The wagon careened around a bend, momentarily shielding them from view. Jake didn't need to say it twice. Lena was already moving as they hit the tree line, rolling into the brush with the Winchester clutched to her chest. Jake dove after her, landing hard as the unmanned wagon continued rumbling down the trail. From their hiding spot, they watched Delgado's riders thunder past in pursuit of the empty wagon. Only Delgado himself hesitated at the fork, his eyes scanning the brush with unsettling precision. For a heartbeat, his gaze seemed to lock onto theirs. Then with a curse, he spurred his horse after his men. Lena exhaled shakily. That won't stop them for long. Jake rose, brushing dirt from his knees. Wasn't meant to. He pointed toward the distant silhouette of San Juan's church spire. Town's that way. We walk in on foot, let the whole damn county see us together. Makes it harder for him to disappear you later. Lena studied him for a long moment before nodding. As they started walking, her fingers brushed his just once before curling into a determined fist at her side. The message was clear enough, whatever came next, they'd face it. Standing tall in the sunlight, not cowering in the shadows. The sun hung low over the ranch as Jake wiped the sweat from his brow, the scent of fresh-cut hay thick in the air. Lena emerged from the house carrying 2 tin cups of coffee, her movements steady despite the day's tension. She handed him one, their fingers brushing a fleeting contact that spoke louder than words. Delgado won't let this go, she said, staring toward the distant ridge where the riders had disappeared hours earlier. Jake took a slow sip, letting the bitter brew ground him. No, but he'll think twice before coming at us head-on again. He studied her profile, the stubborn set of her jaw, the way her fingers curled tight around the cup. You handled yourself well today. A ghost of a smile touched Lena's lips. Had a good teacher. She nodded toward the barn where Ernesto was repairing a harness, his rifle never far from reach. And good allies. The old vaquero looked up as if sensing their gaze and tipped his hat before returning to his work. Maggie had ridden out earlier, promising to spread word in town about Delgado's ambush attempt. By sundown, every homestead in the valley would know the score. Lena set her cup down with deliberate care. They'll try something else. Men like Delgado always do. Jake followed her gaze to the horizon where storm clouds gathered. Let them. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the silver cufflink he'd taken from the dead gunman, days before the twin to the one Delgado wore. It glinted dully in the fading light. Next time we set the terms. Lena took the cufflink, her thumb tracing the engraved D as if memorizing its contours. When she looked up, her eyes burned with quiet fury. No more running. No more hiding. The unspoken promise hung between them as night settled over the ranch. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote yipped once, twice, then fell silent. Jake didn't need to check his rifle leaning against the porch rail. He knew it was loaded. Knew Lena's Derringer would be under her pillow. Knew Ernesto would take first watch. As the first stars pierced the twilight, Lena reached across the space between them, her calloused fingers finding Jake's. Not a plea for protection, but a pact. Whatever storm was coming, they'd face it together, not as rancher and runaway, but as partners standing their ground in a valley that tolerated no masters. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain and something else, wood smoke maybe from a distant campfire. Jake squeezed Lena's hand once before letting go. Tomorrow would bring its challenges, but for tonight, under a sky vast enough to swallow all troubles, the ranch stood quiet and ready. The morning sun painted the valley in gold as Jake stood under the old mesquite tree, his boots scuffing the same patch of earth where he'd stood alone for years. Only now he wasn't alone. Lena stepped onto the porch, the morning breeze catching strands of hair that had escaped her braid. The sunlight caught the silver star pinned to her shirt, no longer hidden, but worn with quiet pride. Beautiful morning, she said, her voice carrying the same steady calm she'd used facing down Delgado's men. Jake wiped his hands on his chaps, his throat suddenly tight. Best I've seen in years. He reached into his pocket, the simple silver band warm against his palm. Lena Reyes, you rode into my life like a damn hurricane. He began, his voice rougher than he intended. Turned everything upside down, made me question every wall I'd built. She stilled her eyes, locking onto his with that unshakable focus he'd come to admire. He held out the ring. Nothing fancy, just honest silver from a Tucson jeweler. Turns out some things are worth tearing down fences for. Will you? Yes. The word burst from her before he could finish, her hands closing around his with a strength that belied their trembling. Not because I need shelter, she added, her voice fierce, but because I choose to stand with you. The ring slid onto her finger as the mesquite leaves whispered overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark sang a bright, clear note that seemed to echo across the valley. By noon, the news had spread. Maggie arrived first, whooping as she swung down from her horse with a bottle of whiskey and a pie still warm from the oven. Ernesto came next, his usual gruffness softened as he pressed a worn Bible into Jake's hands, the same one his own grandfather had carried west. They married as the sun dipped toward the western ridges, standing before the same weathered altar where Jake's parents had exchanged vows decades earlier. No fancy trappings, just simple words that carried the weight of promises meant to last. "You sure about this ranger?" Jake murmured as he slid a second band onto her finger, this one bearing the Carter family brand worked into the metal. Lena's smile could have lit the darkest canyon. "Never been more sure of anything, cowboy." The celebration lasted long into the night. Neighbors brought tamales and fresh-baked bread. Someone produced a fiddle, and the porch became an impromptu dance floor. Even Ernesto twirled Maggie around in a surprisingly graceful waltz. As the stars wheeled overhead, Jake found himself leaning against the corral fence, Lena's back warm against his chest. The ranch stretched before them, alive with laughter and music so different from the lonely outpost it had been weeks before. Lena tilted her head back to look at him. "Think Delgado will hear about this." Jake's arms tightened around her. "Hope to God he does." He pressed a kiss to her temple, tasting salt and promise. Let him know exactly what he's up against. From the ridge, a lone coyote yipped a reminder that danger still lurked beyond the firelight. But for tonight, under a sky dusted with stars, the ranch stood as a beacon against the dark. Not a fortress, but a home. Not a hiding place, but solid ground worth fighting for. Together. The night settled over the ranch like a well-worn blanket, the chorus of crickets blending with the distant call of a nighthawk. Jake sat on the porch steps, Lena's back warm against his chest as they watched the fireflies dance above the pasture. Her hand rested in his, the silver wedding band glinting in the moonlight, beside the calluses she'd earned working his land. Their land now. "Delgado still thinks I stole something from him," Lena murmured, her thumb tracing the scar along Jake's knuckles. Jake pressed a kiss to the crown of her head, breathing in the scent of sun-warmed skin and sage. "Let him keep thinking that. What matters is you chose this." He nodded toward the corral where their horses stood nose to nose, the garden they'd planted together, the sturdy line of fences rebuilt with shared sweat. "Chose me." A coyote yipped from the ridge, its cry answered by another farther west. The sounds no longer set Jake's teeth on edge. Let the predators prowl, his borders were guarded by more than wood and wire now. Lena turned in his arms, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "Never figured I'd find a place that felt more like freedom than the open trail." She touched the ranger star pinned to her shirt, no longer hidden, but worn alongside her wedding band. Or a partner who understood that sometimes the bravest thing isn't riding away but staying put. The truth of it settled deep in Jake's bones. For years, he'd mistaken solitude for strength, isolation for independence. Now he knew better. Real freedom wasn't about keeping the world at bay. It was knowing exactly what you'd fight to keep close. As the first hint of dawn painted the eastern sky, Jake stood pulling Lena up with him. The ranch stretched before them, quiet and waiting. There would be more storms, more riders testing their fences, more nights spent listening for trouble on the wind. But for now, in this moment, the only sound was Lena's steady breathing beside him, the only light, the slow blush of sunrise gilding the peaks. Not an ending, but a beginning, written not in gunpowder and blood, but in seeds planted, fences mended, and promises made under an endless western sky. Jake squeezed her hand. "Come on, Ranger. Day's coming." Together they walked toward the light,